Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Maths Challenge, the final Maths Challenge before we all have our lovely long summer break. Um, this week's Maths Challenge, we're going to take a little step away from work to do with number, and we're going to instead look at shape. And it's a fairly simple question that the challenge asks. The challenge is called 3 squares. You'll find the PDF with all the details on it in your home learning folders, and there's also a link which takes you through to the Enrich page. And for those of you who've got access to a computer and can play around with this problem, there's an interactive set of squares that you can work with. And the question is very simple, which is what is the greatest number of squares you can create by overlapping 3 squares of the same size? And what you will probably need, you might well need some square paper. You can either use small squares or large squares like this. I've included a grid as part of the PDF if you're able to print that off. Or you might have something at home that's got a grid on that you could put a piece of plain paper and work through. Or another suggestion I've had is that if you've got a mat or something made of cork, you could use thread and pins because that will allow you to move it around. Do check with a grown-up, make sure it's safe, make sure you're not sticking pins anywhere they don't belong. And to make sure that your square is the same size, you will probably need a ruler. Now, of course, if you've got squared paper, you can just simply count squares and make sure the big square that you draw is the same number of squares along as it is down. And the great thing about this problem is it reinforces those properties of what a square is. I'm sure you will know what those properties of a square are, but it would be really useful to have a look, particularly if you've got some squared paper in front of you, have a think about each shape that's on there and what properties that shape has. If you could describe it to somebody but you couldn't show them, what would you tell them? Something else you can do for this problem is that if you can make yourself a square template, like I've got a handy plastic one here, but you could make one out of card, or maybe there's something else at home that is exactly square. You could use that as a basis for drawing around, but it would still be handy for you to have a square base. I'll show you what I mean. This is a starting point where you might have 2 squares that are overlapping. There's one, and here is another. And overlapping, of course, means that one has just gone on top of the other. But because I haven't coloured the squares in, I've just got the outline, you can see exactly where the squares have gone. If you look carefully at that, I know I haven't drawn it perfectly well with a ruler, but you can probably see that actually by overlapping the squares, something's happened. So have a little play with 2 squares and then move on to 3 squares and try in lots of different arrangements and see where you have to put the squares to make the most amount of smaller squares. And if you find that that you want to take it on a little bit more and have a greater level of challenge, you might even want to try 4 squares. You are going to have to be a bit systematic about this. You might want to try lots of different, you're going to probably have to try lots of different arrangements before you find the most. You probably need to write down how many squares you think you found. A good tip would be to draw around each of the squares that you find in a different colour. That could be felt tip pens or coloured pencils. And that way, that's a very good visual check that you have found all the squares that you think. If you're working with a grown-up, maybe the grown-up can help you to spot any squares that you might have missed. Good luck with this. It's nice to do something on shape rather than number for once. And particularly as this is such a visual challenge, really would love to see any of your working out, any of your conclusions that you come to. Just as before, you might want to keep a working wall going at home, maybe try a couple of different combinations of squares each day. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing how you get on. Take care, everyone, and good luck with the challenge. Bye.